Many of you might be wondering how you are going to have enough time and energy to lead your club, along with all the other aspects of your life. Well, lucky for you, we have a great speaker this morning that will be able to help you frame that thought better. I invite Carol to come up and introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Ken. So, our speaker this morning is an endowed professor of ethics and author of several books. He co hosts the Ethical Life podcast and writes a bi weekly column printed in 72 newspapers nationwide. He grew up in northern Minnesota, but has traveled abroad. In fact, he says he fell in love with his wife, Cindy, while hitchhiking through Scotland. As busy as he is teaching, writing, and speaking, he knows how to relax. He's a trout fisherman, but in true Rotary fashion, serves on a board that works to conserve, protect, and restore North America's cold water fisheries and their watersheds. Please welcome fellow Rotarian from the Downtown Club of La Crosse, Wisconsin, Dr. Richard Kyte.
Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you
I want to
like-
talk to you about this topic of third places. I wrote a book called Finding Your Third Place a couple of years ago. And since then, I've been able to travel around and talk to people in all kinds of communities about what they're doing to make their communities richer and more engaged. And it's been really rewarding to hear about all these ideas. And the third place is an idea that you can leverage to find out how do we increase social engagement in our areas. It's a term that was invented by a sociologist named Ray Oldenburg, and it refers to the fact that our first place is home, second place is work, third place is where we hang out. It's where we go to socialize. It's where we make and develop friendships. And so I've been thinking about this topic of community, and one of the questions I get repeatedly is how did I get interested in it? When did I first start thinking about community? And I realized I've been thinking about community my whole life. See, I grew up in kind of a rare community. It's Frazee, Minnesota, home of the world's largest turkey. So, and you're from Minnesota. You all know. Anybody from Frazee here? By there? Detroit Lakes? Perm. So yeah, Frazee, if you don't know, it's on Highway 10 between Perm and Detroit Lakes. And they had a problem when Highway 10 was improved. It used to go right through the downtown, then it bypassed the town, and the tourists kept, visiting. They weren't visiting Sue's Cafe anymore, and they tried to figure out, what do we do? Because we didn't have a symbol of our identity like all the other towns. Like Vergas was just down the road. They had all kinds of things, and all these towns had something. We of course had Turkey Day Parade, and with Turkey Day Parade we had the Demolition Derby and the Miss Turkey Pageant, and we had the Pet and Doll Parade. This is me and my sister dressed up as Raggedy Ann and Andy. I had the misfortune of having 3 aunts that were in high school, and they liked to dress us up and enter us into contests. And I think there are laws preventing that sort of thing these days, but that's the kind of childhood that we had. If you look at the photo there, you'll see Bob and Fred Daggett of Daggett Truck Lines. They got first place, and then Reagan, Ann, and Andy, that my sister and I, we got second. And there's Mark Wolthy as Humpty Dumpty. His dad ran the bait shop in town. He's a good egg. And so we had all of these things, but we didn't have any big symbols. Like Vergas had the world's largest loon, and so we'd end up going to have picnics seated by the loon in Pelican Rapids, the world's largest pelican. All these towns had something that was a symbol of their identity to attract all the tourists. There's Fergus Falls, the world's largest otter. It's not a real attractive otter, but I'm sorry if you're from Fergus Falls. But they had something. That was the big thing. They had something, and of course, Bemidji, we all envied Bemidji with the statue of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. But we didn't have anything. And so the town council started deliberating, what do we do to bring tourists back into town revitalize our community, and they decided what we need to do is build the world's largest turkey. We've already got turkey days. We've got all these turkey farms. My grandpa was a turkey farmer. Let's do that. And so they put out bids for a turkey, and they got some bids, and they took the cheapest one, which probably wasn't the brightest move. It turns out this guy had never built a giant animal before, and they had all these announcements that this was going to be done by Turkey Days at the last weekend in July, and the whole town was excited, and kids would keep sneaking out into the park behind these tarps that were erected to hide the progress. They would sneak in there and see how it was doing. It's just a big ball of chicken wire. He called it turkey wire, but you could tell it was chicken wire. And it's a big ball of chicken wire with sticks out the back to create the fan for the turkey, and then a stick out the front for the head. And then he coated that in paper mache and then put fiberglass over the top. And about 2 weeks before Turkey Days is scheduled, he still isn't close to being done. And city council's trying to track him down. They realized, he said, well, he needed to be paid the rest of the money in advance. We had enough materials to finish the turkey. So they paid him off in advance. He comes in, he does a rush job, he finishes it up. Frazee was on Good Morning America, the whole town on the hill in front, and that's why Frazee is world famous now, because we were on national news in Good Morning America, the whole town waving good morning, and there's the turkey, and it kind of ugly. In fact, it didn't look like this. It wasn't all white at first. It was nice and colorful at first. The problem is that winter chips started falling off of it because he hadn't seal coated it, and UV light breaks down fiberglass, and all these pieces started falling off, and so they had to get some local guys to patch it up, and they just painted the whole thing white, and they justified this by saying, well, this is like, we have turkey farms. It looks just like farms. Of course, it disappeared in the winter. But we don't have many tourists in the winter anyway, so that was all right. And so they were really happy for about 10 years. And then I call up my dad one time and say, Dad, so how are things going in town? And he says, well, things are pretty much the same. The turkey seems to be falling over. I said, like, what? He says, yeah, it's kind of leaning. They don't know what's going on. And I called him up the next time. I called him up, and he said, well, did they figure out what's going on with the turkey? And he says, yeah, they figured out. They sent Ray Aynard in there to weld some supports in, because those cracks had developed. The rain had been coming in and rusting the supports all these years, and it was starting to tip over, and it was going to break off and roll down the hill and crush all the tourists. So they sent Ray in there to weld supports, and he set it on fire. So the good news about all this is that Frazee made national news for the second time in 10 years, which is, as you know, like a town of 1,000 people, that's pretty rare. So that was good. The bad thing is that they didn't have a big turkey anymore. So that wasn't so good. But I've been thinking all these years about community, like, yeah. Well, there is. I'm not going to leave you hanging forever. I'll get to that. I'll tell you what, there is a new turkey. I'll show you a picture. I'll show you a picture in a little bit. But this question has really perplexed me. What makes a community good, and how do we make a community better? And I know, like, you can make mistakes. You can do things wrong when you're trying to build a community, and sometimes it ends disastrously. You can also do things really well. And when we travel around the country and we look at various towns, you find that some are really flourishing and some are really struggling. And you ask, like, what's the difference? And part of it is economics, what businesses are located there, but there's other factors too, and a lot of it seems to be leadership. And who are the people there, and how do the people interact? And when you go into a friendly town, or you go into a town where people don't seem to like each other or collaborate very much, and there's a huge difference. So I've been thinking about this for years. And when we ask people about what do we do to make our communities better? There's different kinds of responses. Some people are looking back and they say like, well, we need to go back to the way things used to be. And other people are looking forward. We need to change things and move forward. And so then this question comes up. Well, are we better or worse off than we used to be? And so that's this question. Is life today better or worse than it was, say, 50 years ago? And when we start looking into that, find out that the answer is pretty interesting because it seems to be both better and worse, doesn't it? Like some things are better and some things are worse. So let's start with what's better. First of all, 50 years ago, about 60% of the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's under 10%. That's a huge change. And that right there, I mean, like things are so much better worldwide than they were back in the days when I was growing up in Frazee. And it's not just that, we've eradicated all kinds of diseases. As Rotarians, we know what's been done with polio, but it's not just polio, it's hundreds of diseases that have either been eliminated or greatly reduced. And so there's much less suffering in the world than there was in the past. Child mortality is greatly reduced. For most of the world's history, about 40% of children died before the age of 5. Today, in most countries, it's under 5%. So we've made tremendous improvements. And then if we look at life expectancy, we find out that life expectancy has been increasing year by year, pretty much continuously, depending on what continent we're on, anywhere from about 1870 to 1930. And it's really at the time that you get three things coming together. You get industrialization, capitalism, and democracy. And you get those three things coming together, and what you have is real increases in education, in wealth, in agriculture, in healthcare. And we find that living conditions get much, much better. Here's the problem. Survey after survey that asks people this question, are things getting better? Finds out that the majority of people think things are getting worse. And it's not just a little bit worse, overwhelmingly worse. And if you look at the countries that are at the bottom there, the countries that are the wealthiest and the most advanced are the countries where people are most cynical about the state of the world and about our future. And that poses a real problem. Why is it that where things are arguably the best and have been the best for the longest, feel the worst about where we're going? One indicator is this. In the United States, like in most developed nations, social trust is declining. And this is a measure of how much do we trust one another. It's not just a matter of how much do we trust institutions, that's declining too, and we've seen a lot of headlines about that. We just trust our neighbors less than we used to, and quite a bit less. And then, so there's a question. So things are getting better. We trust our institution, we trust our neighbors less. Why is that? Well, we started measuring about 1990 or so, we started measuring subjective measures of well-being. Subjective measures of well-being, things like on the positive side, you have like things like flourishing and happiness, and you've probably seen some of the happiness studies. We also ask questions about anxiety, depression, stress, loneliness, burnout. There's been a lot of study of these things. That doesn't go back very far that we've been doing direct surveys of people to ask them how are they feeling about things. Words like burnout doesn't get invented as a term until 1988. What we find is as long as we've been marking these trends, subjective measures of well-being have been getting worse. And so we find that anxiety has been increasing. We don't know for how long, but as long as we've been measuring it. Depression, along with anxiety, seems to be getting worse. And right now what we're finding is that a lot of people have symptoms of anxiety and depression, about a third of the population. But notice here, it's not distributed equally across the generations. If you're older, if you're in the baby boomer generation, you probably aren't much more prone to anxiety and depression than you ever were, or that generations were before you. But if you're in that younger age group, you're much more likely to have these symptoms. And so young people are being disproportionately affected by these negative measures of well-being. And a big factor in all of this is loneliness. Loneliness is really increasing, and it's increased especially, we notice, in the United States, and in most developed nations, loneliness has increased at a much more rapid rate than in relatively undeveloped parts of the world. So the question is why? What's the big factor going on here that we're, even as things are getting better objectively, we're feeling worse about things? And I think the big central answer is just technology. Technology does two things. It increases our power, we can do more things, and it increases our freedom. We can do them more conveniently. So this is what things like computers and cell phones do. They increase our power and our freedom, and those are good things. It allows us to do much more. Like I could drive up here without getting lost. Like that's a great thing. My wife and I don't have arguments over maps anymore. That's pretty positive. There's a whole bunch of things that happen. But notice, if we look at the pace of technological change, that it's not just that we're seeing a lot of changes, it's that the pace of change is increasing. And so the rate at which new technological developments affect our lives, and especially how it affects our social lives, is really profoundly speeding up. When ChatGPT was introduced a few years ago, it was 2 weeks from the time of its public introduction until I had a student write a paper by ChatGPT. It was really obvious. And we at the university didn't have any policies about it because it's not plagiarized, it's original, right? And we have to start, like, what do we do about this new thing? And so then we have to start teaching differently and grading differently. We have to do all these things differently. But every time we introduce technology that's really powerful, then we have to change how we interact with one another. And the pace at which we're changing those interactions is increasing so much, and it's really unsettling. It's like we don't know if the modes of our interaction from year to year are going to be the same. And then if we look at our brains don't change at the same pace as technology. In fact, we have pretty much the same brains as our ancestors who lived here a couple thousand years ago, right? Like we're pretty much the same. What do our brains really punish us for? They punish us in the forms of increasing our feelings of being ill at ease, our anxiety, when we're in threatening situations where we don't know what's going to happen in the future, when we don't know, like the group of people around us. We're rewarded when we walk into a friendly setting, when we walk into a room of people where we know everybody, where everybody knows your name, we feel good. We get all these endorphins. Our brains reward us for feeling belonging and feeling connection, and they punish us when we're feeling uncertainty or threat. And we're increasingly in a world in which our social relations are in this continual state of disruption, where we're more and more often feeling like we're potentially in a threatening situation, even if we aren't really in danger. I mean, all the indications are like we're living longer, we're healthier, we've got all these advantages. We're under less threat when we ever have been, but we're feeling more like we're under threat. I started trying to find out, so we've only got these measures going back about 35 years of directly asking people, how are we feeling? But is there some indication that changes have been taking place longer, over the past couple hundred years? And I started playing around with a tool called the Google Ngram. And the Google Ngram allows you to track the relative frequency with which words get used, especially how often do they appear in print. And so I typed in 2 words, friend and self. And if you look at the red there, that's the word friend. In blue is the word self. And what we find out is in 1800, the word friend appeared in print about 3 times as often as the word self. By 2000, the word self appears in print about 3 times as often as the word friend. Now, this isn't a direct measure of whether we have more friendships or not, but it's a pretty good indication. We're thinking more about ourselves today and less about friends. And our ancestors thought a lot more about friends. And that probably explains why they were doing psychologically much better, even though there were a lot of things that weren't very good. Like you didn't want to have a toothache in 1800. Okay. So if we look at what's going on more recently, we find out that our latest generations are disproportionately affected, and we've had this steady increase of worse feelings for a long time, but now we've reached a crisis situation, or especially since about 2012, we've got real problems with our youngest generation, and that seems to be largely due to cell phones and social media. So the first year that the majority of middle school kids in this country had their own smartphones and their own social media accounts is 2012. That's when we find that anxiety starts to really spike, and we've seen it's like a hockey stick measurement. It starts going up, and it's been increasing ever since. This is from Jonathan Haidt's research that he printed in his book, The Anxious Generation, a couple of years ago. But here's another source, comes from the sociologist Jean Twenge, like depressive symptoms going up really considerably since about that same time. Right around 2011, 2012, we really see a spike in depression among young people. And then loneliness, and especially young men are experiencing loneliness at a really great rate. And it seems to be due largely to how much time is spent on digital devices, because what happens is the more time we spend on one of these, the less time we're interacting and developing friendships. And it's known as opportunity cost, and this is really important. And of the negative slides, this is the last negative slide. Now that I've thoroughly depressed all of you, this is maybe the most significant one. It's not just that symptoms are changing, our personalities seem to be changing. And these are 4 measures from what's known as the Big 5 personality profile. And what we're finding is for the first time since we've been tracking these personality traits since around 1950, we're seeing over the last 20 years or so some real changes in personalities. And you'll see a drop in conscientiousness, but most importantly for our purposes, like an increase in introversion. That is, people are less extroverted, more introverted. Now that's really significant for Minnesotans who tend to be famously introverted anyway. If you remember Garrison Keillor's definition of the Minnesota extrovert is somebody who looks at other people's shoes when they talk. This is really bad. If we're becoming what does that mean for people wanting to join clubs where the whole activity is social interaction? So, but pay attention to this because it indicates that we need to make a change. So when he asks, what do we do? I want to start with this, the Rotary Vision Statement. We see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our community, and in ourselves. And I think we really have to focus on that last part, in ourselves. Because what we've been seeing is technology has been producing a change in ourselves, not because we've been seeking it, it just has this effect. But as human beings, as a species, we have this extraordinary ability to intentionally and deliberately change the way we live, what we do, how we focus, how we talk to one another, how we interact. And so we can make these changes intentionally, and the first one has to be that we prioritize friendship. Friendship is uniquely important to us as a species. For one thing, if we look at something like the mental health quotient, this is from the Mental State of the World report, we find that people who have 10 or more friends overwhelmingly describe themselves as thriving or flourishing. People who have no close friends overwhelmingly describe themselves as distressed or struggling. And yet the number of people who have 10 or more close friends has really declined. 1990, third of the population had 10 or more close friends. Today it's only about 13%. And many more people say they have no friends. And we know from the research it takes a long time to make a friend. To consider somebody to be just a casual friend takes about 50 hours of interaction. To consider somebody to be a close or a good friend takes about 200 hours. That's a lot of time of just social interaction, and we're not doing it as much. This is the key thing. So we can prioritize friendship by just spending a lot more time interacting with people, which will result in more friendship over the course of a lifetime. That leads us to number 2. How do we do that? We join a group. And when I ask people about this, you get this response, I'm just not a joiner. Well, joining isn't a personality trait. It's just something you do. It's something you decide. And this is the great thing about it. And it has all these benefits. So Robert Putnam, he's the greatest psychologist of the 20th century. He wrote the book called Bowling Alone. And he finds this research, so like surveying all kinds of people that are engaged in social interaction, that joining a club reduces your chance of dying in the next year by 50%. There's all kinds of reasons for that, but that's really significant. We also can look at things like dementia. We know that dementia is a big risk. It's really been increasing, expected to double in the next 25 years. And yet, if we participate in social groups, we have something like a 30 to 50% reduction in risk of dementia. So it's number one most important thing, and it gets really under-promoted, under-reported. I'm going to go through this quickly, but I'm going to take you back to Becker County. This is something I would encourage you to do when you have a little time. Go on to the Social Capital Index, and you can look up your county. And you can see how is your county doing in social capital. That is the amount of social interaction in your community. Why is that so important? Well, it produces more friendship. It also is the number one factor in upward income mobility. So if we're really concerned about children who are raised in poverty, getting out of poverty and improving their economic situation in life, that's what you want to do. You want to have social connectedness. And we measure that by talking about economic connectedness. How well are people across the income spectrum, how are they interacting with one another? And so if we look at Becker County, it's doing pretty good in terms of economic connectedness because there's quite a bit of social interaction. But that's a measure of these two things: exposure, how much are people of different income levels exposed to one another, along with friending bias. And then if you look at friending bias, you find out, well, Becker County's not doing so well with that, right? Like, that's where they can improve. And it turns out if you look at that friending bias chart, that's where you find out that counties throughout the state of Minnesota are really spread out. There's some counties that are doing really well. There's some counties that aren't doing well at all. And it's the one thing that we can key on and say, okay, what can we really do in our communities? We can improve the ease with which friendships develop in our communities. How do we do that? That's what I talk about. Like, how do you find your third place? What is a third place? Well, it's things like libraries, cafes, coffee shops. This is a group of friends meeting at the bodega. It's been a local watering hole in La Crosse for over 100 years, and this is a group of people that are meeting there after work. I happen to know them. They work for Mississippi Valley Conservancy, and they're fortunate. It's a group of people that they enjoy working with one another, and they also enjoy socializing. And you could probably say they're probably doing pretty well. Not all communities have a lot of third places. This is a story I found in the Los Angeles Times about the best coffee shops in LA. That's not a third place. Might be a coffee shop, but there's not a single person talking to another person. Okay. So just because something is a cafe or a coffee shop or something like that doesn't mean it's a third place. It's a third place if people are interacting. So I'm gonna jump past here, but I'm just going to give you a few photos. What are some third places? Well, they're maybe not the place that you expect, and they're not necessarily traditional places. They're places like like farmers markets, wherever you see people interacting socially, farmers markets, pickleball courts, the #1 fastest growing sport in America right now. Gyms, most young people say, if you ask, like, what is your third place? I hear gym more than anything else. And the other thing is clubs. And this is places like Interact, Rotaract, things like that. They're doing really well because what they do is they gather people together into activities. And this is what we find, we're asked to, like, young people, they don't necessarily just want to go to a traditional kind of place and just hang out. Remember, they're much more likely to be introverts. Just opening up a place and saying, why don't you come and join us? That's not the sort of thing introverts are very likely to do. Extroverts, great. They're like, sign me up. Introverts, much less likely. You have to bring them in. But if you can bring people into an activity and say, is this something you like to do? Here's some other people who like to do it with you. Much more likely. And so you have to change what we do with changing personalities. A couple of years ago, I go back to Frazee. They eventually, they did the turkey right. They had it built in Wisconsin. They went to Fast Corp, which is based in Sparta, Wisconsin. They built the turkey there. They put it on a Daggett truck, and they hauled it to Frazee and installed it. And it's really nice. And there's me and my dog, Mickey. And if you ever want to go there just off of Highway 10, you might have to wait a couple hours in line, but it's worth it. But there's many ways of building community. The primary one is this focus on friendship and focus on how do we get people to gather together around activities. And this is a key thing. Like, the third place isn't just having places that are available to go to in communities. It's a mindset. It's a way of life. So thank you all very much. Am I out of time do we have time for questions, or can I do that later? I can do that later. So I'll be out in the hall. I've got some books and things. So if you have questions, happy to answer them. Thanks a lot.
Push the button, it helps. Thank you, Richard. I'm happy to know that there is a way that we can get beyond all those bad slides you showed at the beginning. So we all should look for our third place, and I think Rotary is a great place to find that. If you're, I think it helps all of us if we are active in an organization like Rotary. So thank you so much.